It is axiomatic in politics that younger voters think differently about politicians and elections than their older cohorts. There are likely at least a few of you watching your 21 or 22-year-old kid come home from school talking about how mad they are about Joe Biden. And trust me, it can be confusing why young people vote the way that they do. It's like they can't understand what we're facing in a potential second Donald Trump administration. But I can tell you, it's not that they don't understand or that they're too wrapped up in their technology to care. Young people are very engaged. I see it every day with my students at Morgan State University. The point is that they are frustrated with the system and feel unheard and marginalized. That ends up manifesting itself in what they share and post on platforms like TikTok, which in turn informs how their peers view politics and dictates the outreach needed by a candidate to talk to them. Reporter Taylor Lorenz, who covers technology and online culture, talked to some of these hyper-engaged folks for the Washington Post. And she joins me now, along with Santiago Mayer, the founder and executive director of Voters of Tomorrow. Taylor, thank you so much for this. Gen Z voters is my passion project, right? As a college professor and as someone who I never want to go into the get off my lawn guy. I think young people are very well engaged. But just give us a brief summary. What did you find out in talking to a lot of TikTok influencers? Why are they frustrated in Biden? What's changed between 2020 and now that's made them rethink the algorithm of whether or not they want to support the president?
Yeah, well, hundreds of really prominent TikTok and YouTube and Twitch streamers, content creators with collectively hundreds of millions of followers, basically feel like Biden has abandoned his core campaign promises. They're upset that he hasn't made enough progress on climate. They're extremely upset about the situation in Gaza, which they feel like Biden is helping to facilitate by sending weapons. They're very upset that, Biden has not done anything to combat the COVID pandemic. And then they also really are upset. 67% of according to this Morning Consult poll, said Biden's decision to ban TikTok makes them less likely to vote for him.
Yeah, now that is one that I have heard a tremendous amount about, because TikTok isn't just a place to hang out and play. It's also a place where people make money. Santiago, I got to ask you this, because this is something, as a political science professor and as a political scientist, I always think about. There's a big difference between being politically engaged and politically involved, right? Lots of people like to go online and scream. It doesn't mean they're necessarily voting. When you do work in getting sort of future voters involved, do you find that the people who are posting on TikTok, the people who are still posting on Instagram and YouTube, do they actually tend to change people's votes, or are they just sort of yelling into an echo chamber?
Well, first of all, Jason, thank you so much for having me. I think, listen, we know that the most effective messengers for young people are their friends, their classmates, their people in real life. And obviously, online media and social media is a phenomenal tool to spread your message. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, it is the conversations that people are having with their peers that will dictate how they vote. Mm-hmm. And that is why at Voters of Tomorrow, we're building an incredible relational organizing program that will have millions of conversations across the country in college campuses and in parties, in bars, everywhere young people gather, about what the contrast is, because the contrast this election could not be clearer.
So I want to ask you this before I follow up with Taylor. One thing that I've noticed in a lot of my research is that we've seen a very interesting convergence with Gen Z voters. At one point, there used to be a huge difference between, say, what a college-educated 22-year-old cares about and somebody who's working at Walmart. Now they've combined. The kid graduating from college cares about minimum wage as much as the person who's making a minimum wage. How does that change how we communicate with young people? Because it's not just good enough to go to campuses anymore.
Right, and that, again, right, that is why we have to meet young people wherever they are, whether that's at a school, if they go to school, or whether that is at a local library, whether that is at a Starbucks, whether that is at a bar. We need to meet young people wherever they are and be equipped to have these conversations. And but our volunteers, and I know the Biden campaign is working really hard on this, has recruited thousands of young people that are not only being trained to have these conversations and talk about the issues that matter to young people, like the minimum wage, right, but also to be able to convince them to go out and vote, because caring about these issues does nothing if you're not casting a ballot for it.
Taylor, I want to ask you this. It's very interesting, because part of being young is being too cool to get invited, right? And you have some influencers who say, hey, look, part of why I'm not talking about Joe Biden anymore is because he hasn't called me this year. His campaign didn't reach out to me the same year. And you have some influencers who say, well, you know what? I can't believe that once I have been critical of the administration's behavior on climate change or this, that, or the other, they don't reach out to me anymore. How do you think strategically campaigns are addressing that? Because if you ignore someone once they criticize you, it's a lot harder to bring them back to support you when you need their vote, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely huge mistake for any political campaign to think that the internet is somehow separate from real life, and that, you know, these conversations and the sentiment on platforms like TikTok aren't shaping real life political behavior. This is quite literally how we got Donald Trump, was, you know, his ability to really leverage the media and the internet, right? So these are very important channels for political messaging. Now, these content creators have said many times over, they don't care about being invited to things like the White House Christmas party. What they want is accountability. These people worked incredibly hard to get Biden elected in 2020, and now they have to answer to their followings. You know, a lot of these content creators are Muslim or people of color, and they feel, as you mentioned, there's a great deal of solidarity among Gen Z, where they have a lot of, you know, feelings where they want to support each other. And they see Biden sending all this aid to Israel, and they feel like they live in a failed state, that he's not really addressing their needs. So that's the core issue. And I don't know, I mean, there was a great story in the New York Times that backed up my reporting, saying that the Biden has just not cracked through to these online spaces, and other candidates have.
Taylor, one of the things that I notice, and a lot of people that I follow on TikTok, and some I follow and some I let my students direct me to, because I was like, okay, that's where you're getting your information from. There's a real fear sometimes, because if I have 1 million followers because I dance or I cook, sometimes those influencers are afraid to move out of that space and talk about an issue that matters to them. How well have elected officials been, or have they just completely failed in that area in convincing people to perhaps move out of your comfort zone? I saw someone who I follow yesterday say, hey, look, I never talk about this, but let's talk abortion today. Thousands of comments. Is the administration realizing that you're going to have to coax some of these people out of their comfort zone?
I mean, absolutely. I think actually that's one thing that the Biden administration has done a decent job of. When they did things like the vaccine rollout or their infrastructure initiative, they did work with a lot of those like sort of mainstream content creators. I think actually a lot more content creators today are more comfortable talking politics than 4 years ago. What's hard is just that they are not aligned. And the Biden administration, as you mentioned earlier, they have not been willing to work with content creators that are critical or want to talk about Gaza or COVID or, you know, the TikTok ban. And that, I think is hurting them ultimately, because these people drive the conversation. Just the way that the White House is responsible to, they give Fox News comment as much as they give us comment. The Washington Post is critical. They need to recognize these people are the new media.
Taylor Lorenz and Santiago Mayer, you guys are great. We definitely should have you back. Thank you both for joining us this evening on All In.